Hello everyone, and welcome to this video which is in our Human Game series. I'm Grandmaster Matthew Sadler, and we're taking a look at some interesting openings from the Women's Candidates Quarter-Final match between Tan and Tan-Lagno. Now this was a very dramatic match, and apart from the drama, it also featured some very interesting openings. And we're going to be focusing on 3 of the 4 standard time control matches, which, I just saw all the openings and I thought they were really, really interesting. The first game is the first one, Tan against Tan-Lagno, and it featured a Queen's Gambit declined. Now, I'm always interested when black players go in for this, because in my day, the pre-computer age, this was really thought to be very nice for white. The reason is that, we have a standard Carlsbad structure, as it's known, but white has not yet committed the knight to f3 and can play the knight to e2. And this gives white the opportunity to play a very aggressive plan, first developed by Botvinnik, just to play f3 and e4 and break through in the centre. And black had a lot of problems against this this system, but in actual fact, recently, especially with the help of engines, which were not at all afraid of this system, blacks found a lot of interesting ideas, and this was one very interesting idea. Now, in my day as well, it was always said that this move h7 to h6 was a big mistake because it weakened the kingside light squares. If ever white gets a knight onto this outpost e5, it's impossible to chase it away with f7 to f6 because the g6 square is weak and the knight could jump into there. However, playing the move h6 is also useful because it means that the h-pawn is no longer en prise when white gets a battery along the b1 to h7 diagonal. And, the engines are making good use of this. AlphaZero actually used this idea of an early h6 and then a quick knight to h5 in order to swap off bishops. But nowadays they're playing this idea, knight e8. And the idea is you want to exchange off the dark square bishops. White refuses for now, and then the knight comes around to d6. And this knight is in a very nice place on d6. It's able to jump into to c4 as well as the standard e4 outpost, and more importantly, it supports queenside play from black, and not the queenside play c6 to c5, which was all we thought of in the pre-computer age, but queenside play with b5 and a5 and b4. Quite amazing. I mean, it really is quite shocking for me, with a lot of experience on the white side of this, to see how powerful this is with black. And the funny thing is actually that I started analysing positions with engines a very long time ago, maybe 2013, 14, and you saw all these plans happening, but you just sort of thought, this can't be good, can't believe it. But just seems to be really, really good indeed. So what happens? Queen c2, a5 played, castles and knight a6. We're threatening knight to b4 here. So a3 to stop that, and rook e8. And many things have been played in this position. We've seen f3, we've seen h3 as well, and Tan played rook d1 in this position. The engines, in actual fact, they're not really that keen on white, I have to say. In actual fact, one funny plan that came up was played by Dragon. Dragon played king h1 with the idea that after b5 it played the move knight g1. So clearly doesn't like that knight on e2, and the knight is coming round to f3 and into e5 later. Not a stupid idea at all. And it was actually quite interesting what happened. I quite like this as a plan, to be honest. Takes, e5, queen e7, a4 undermining, b3, knight a3. That knight's feeling a little bit nervous there. Rook e1, takes, knight b5. I mean, black was actually quite well organised and, basically reached equality. But it felt like there were quite a few challenges for black along the way there. So look out for this plan, king h1 and knight g1. Tan played rook d1, which is very natural, bishop f8, h3, and then bishop d7. Yeah, that's not too bad. I mean, you could also just play b5 immediately, which is what my engines were doing. And now Stockfish was doing something very similar to what Dragon did, but with the other knight, who was playing the move knight to b1, bishop d7, knight d2, and after knight c4, the knight's coming round to f3. Yeah, that's possible too. The other knight will come round to c3, and you've got basically the same. But I do find Dragon's idea a little bit more elegant there. But bishop d7 was played by Lagno, and rook e1 played, and now b5. And I mean, White's big problem always is that you know, the e4 break is not amazingly fantastic, and you know, you feel that it should be really, really good, but it's never quite as amazing as all that. However, you know, with this move b5 at this precise moment, the engines were actually recommending White to play e4 now. And then after knight c7, a couple of ideas. Could go e5 and knight f4, king h2, and then actually playing the knight back and then playing f4 and f5. Pretty dangerous, pretty interesting. Another idea that that White has is to play the after knight c7 to play bishop d6 here, and after takes go e5 and then go f4. Rook b8, c5 coming in, b4. You know, Black's getting the counterplay, and also the dark squares for White are a little bit weak because yeah, we've swapped off the dark squared bishop. But on the other hand, yeah, you know, yeah, it's quite a complicated position, really. Sorry, I'm hearing my father shout penalty for England at this very moment. So takes, and knight ac1, knight e6, king h2, knight takes c5, and the position's pretty unclear. Yeah, so that was quite interesting. I think that was probably the one moment that White had to really become active. In the game, Zhongyi played knight c1, and actually Black took over the initiative. This was quite striking. Takes, queen b1, knight takes d3. Actually, the engines are already getting quite enthusiastic. Queen f6 was an interesting idea of Stockfish's. And after bishop e5, you were taking and going queen takes e5, and just claiming that you know, this king side is quite weak here, and you know, this knight's going to move out of the way, and the bishop's going to come round to d6. Going to be hard to cover all these squares. But yeah, I mean, Lagno played knight takes d3, takes bishop f5. Queen to a2, and now the engines again were bishop d3 was played by Lagno, but the engines thought that playing a little bit more aggressively with a4 and then h5, and just coming into the king side, saying, okay, you know, you've got your pieces on the queen side here really tied up. I'm going to start you know, moving my my pawn forward and attacking the king side like this. This was a reasonably serious initiative according to the engines. They were still managing to draw it, so it's not terrible, but yeah, you know, it was really Black for choice here. And kind of typical actually of how the match went, because Lagno got a lot of positions that were, you know, not winning but promising, and somehow just didn't end up making the most of all of those chances. But that was a very interesting line I found with Black. You know, definitely in the Queen's Gambit declined. You would definitely say that this idea of a quick h6 followed by knight e8 round to d6, it's definitely worth you know, worth looking at there. Now let's have a look at the next game. The next game was quite interesting as well. This was Lagno as White, Zhongyi Tan as Black, and it was bishop b5 Czech Sicilian. And well, this was the bane of my life as a Black Najdorf player, because it's a rather annoying system. Very hard to get anything positive against it. Very easy to stand worse. You know, it was really very irritating indeed. And of course, you know, you had a lot of Najdorf lines that you had to hold in your head, and at the same time, you know, these lines got actually quite involved. It's not seen as much nowadays, but still got a little bit of venom. And in this position, Lagno came up with something very interesting, which was this move, rook e3. Not very well known, but there have been just a few White games with it, and they'd scored very, very well indeed. So what is the idea? Well, the idea is simply to go knight c3, and then at some stage to move the knight out of the way and just get the rook involved on the third rank. Very simple, but not that easy to deal with. Now, one very good idea here for black, actually, and that's what the engines point out straight away, is the move bishop b4. The idea is that if you go knight c3, then I can take that with a bishop, and you're not going to get rid of my knight that easily. If the bishop gets chased away, it can come around a5 to b6 and attack the pawn on d4. Yeah, I mean, if you don't, if you are seeing this line for the first time, not necessarily the thing that you think of. So Zhongyi Tan played bishop e7 here, knight c3 takes, and now we've got two choices. I mean, rook takes c3 is possible. Not stupid at all, actually. After castles, we can play something like, for example, bishop f4, a5 and h4. And, you know, for an engine, this is not at all worrying. You know, engine just will always find the defences. For a human player, it's a little bit irritating for black because, you know, you have to deal with some sort of attacking play and you're not 100% sure what's going on there. But, yeah, a4. Was played by black here, a3, knight a5, knight g5, knight b3. And here actually the engines were forcing a draw already with knight takes h7. We go king takes, queen h5, king g8, rook g3, and we go g6, and we let white sacrifice everything, and it's just a draw there. So, you know, that's all possible. Rook c3 is quite interesting. White played the more challenging line, I think, which is b takes c3, just solidifying this d4 pawn. Oops, no taking on there. Castles was played, and now the move knight e1. And, yeah, I mean, black's just got to react here quite smartly, really, because, you know, if I start getting rook h3 and queen h5 in, then actually quite nasty. So black played f6. Now, if you go rook h3, we're going to play rook f7. This is the key idea, so that we can defend with g6, for example. F6 was played. E takes f6. Rook takes f6. Rook e2. b5 now, and this was a slightly strange move. I think rook f5 is what the engine wants, and it's quite logical. You're just going to play bishop d6 and e5 basically, and that seemed to be enough to hold the balance. After b5, well, you know, we play bishop g5. We swap off this dark squared bishop, and we come in with knight d3, and you know, potentially we could just bring the knight into c5, line up, and you know, this e6 pawn could be pretty vulnerable. What black did in this position was pretty good, I think. You know, a5 and then b4, just basically trying to break up the centre. And you know, if the centre's broken up, then you know, these e5 and c5 outposts are going to be much less important. And after takes, knight takes d4, rook e1, knight b5 was a nice move, aiming for knight c3 together with d4 there. Queen g4, knight c3. Rook b3, takes, knight e4. Oh yeah, f3, queen a7, king there, knight f2. Then basically black was doing fine. Nice little tactics, you know. This rook is hanging, but then this rook is hanging too. Yeah, I mean, black did pretty well there, and you know, black's a little bit worse. You know, that pawn on e6 is weak in principle. You can imagine the a2 pawn being lost for white, but winning the e6 and d5 in return. But then it's rook and 3 versus rook and 2, which is just a draw. But yeah, you know, I thought it was a nice idea from Lagno there. Just it could have worked out very well, but yeah, I think, you know, Zhongyi Tan played actively at the right moment. Maybe not the most 100% most accurate from the engine point of view, but good enough active play to avoid, you know, landing in a passive position. The third game that I wanted to show you was the third game in the match. And this was Zhongyi Tan against Katerina Lagno. And here, Zhongyi Tan played something slightly different. Didn't try and repeat that Queen's Gambit system, played knight c3, and we ended up in a Vienna variation. So bishop takes c4 has been the main, yeah, place where there are investigations have taken place with pawn sacrifices like this. Maybe white wasn't quite prepared for that. Maybe this came as a slight surprise. And bishop g5 was played, which is the old-fashioned move. Now, I mean, there have been there's been massive analysis on lines like c5, for example. I mean, that was really popular in my day, in the pre-computer age. But actually, black's just discovered, again with the help of engines, that well, there's a lot more that's pretty decent for black. And h6 takes, bishop takes c4, and c5 has been going pretty well for black as an equalising weapon. So castles was played, c takes d4. And then knight b5. Yeah, I mean, e5 has been a big source of investigation as well. Knight to e4. But somehow, it's black is doing quite all right. I mean, you've got the two bishops. You've got this e5 pawn, which you can attack with knight c6 or knight d7. You've got all sorts of decent ways of developing. There's a game of Manoeuvres here, which I've got in my notes. A3, B4 and G4. Yeah, that's Manoeuvre for you. Rook C1, Queen C7, Knight G3, Queen B8, H4, Knight F8. It's not super easy for black. You know, I'm not sort of 100% reassured, but with some, I guess, with some good preparation, you can, survive this. But looks pretty dangerous to me. Zhang Yitan went for something else, which is going for a different way, a slight edge, but without taking any big risks, without sacrificing that pawn on d4. Played knight b5, queen d8, queen a4, knight c6, knight takes, queen a5, and bishop b5. And here black has to be accurate, and Lagno definitely was that. If you take on a4, I take on a4, and then I just actually pile up on this pawn on c6, and it gets very nasty very soon. B takes c6, I go rook d1, king e7, knight e5, and hey presto, you've lost this pawn already. So that's pretty dangerous, but black has a much better move, which is the move bishop d7. And the idea is if you play something like bishop takes c6, I've even got queen takes a4 there, which is nice and cheeky. So there's all sorts of possibilities. I mean, you could take on a5, which is the engine's main move. Knight takes a5, a3, bishop d6, rook c1, bishop f4. I think that you need to know these lines quite precisely as black. I don't think you'd be guessing these particularly comfortably over the board, but if you know them and if you've if you remember them, then you're going to make it. I mean, lines like this, again, not 100% obvious to a first glance that this is all working fine, but it is. For example, rook c1, we've got this discovered attack, bishop f4. When rook a8, bishop c1 is equal. But yeah, but definitely, if you're in preparation and you remember your lines properly, then you can escape in a variety of ways. White played rook d1. We got takes, and now yeah, this move knight b8, which I'm sure was part of preparation. It's not necessarily a move you'd think of. Got to be careful, by the way, because knight d4 would allow bishop d7, king d7, and rook d4 check. But yeah, knight b8 takes, rook c1, knight f6, just saying, invade my 7th rank. What do I care? So knight b3 was played by Zhang Yitan, and then castles, rook d4, bishop e7, and yeah, I mean, if you go rook c7, this is kind of the most important line. You go bishop d8, and something like rook b7, you go bishop to b6, and then you're going to get your rooks active. And well, I think white's going to end up having some problems with this f2 pawn. We've got ideas like knight e4 takes f2, or knight g4 takes f2, and stuff like rook c8 into c2. So yeah, I mean, actually, white ended up playing a4, rook c8, takes, rook d8, and black had absolutely no problems. Actually, black actually got a very strong initiative in the endgame, and we'll have a look at that in another video, because actually there were some profound things to learn about how to play these very typical rook endings, which I found very instructive looking at this with the engines. But there we are. I mean, those were three interesting ideas. They weren't the most. It wasn't a riveting match at the standard time control like the Koneru against Muzichuk match. But you could see there was a lot of preparation, a lot of opening content in there. And in particular, I think that Lagno showed an awful lot there. With black, two good systems with which actually she gained a fairly serious advantage both times. And then a nice little white opening that didn't quite work out, but really could have done if black hadn't been so careful. So interesting stuff there, and stay tuned, because we're going to look at quite a few more interesting episodes from various matches of the women's candidates.